Welcome to Real Estate 360 Live with Ryan Sloper, the trusted name in real estate radio. Now, here's Ryan Sloper.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Real Estate 360 Live. For those of you not familiar with the podcast, my guest and I will do a weekly podcast about all things real estate, from interest rates to the economy to what's happening in Washington, anything that affects your local real estate decisions. We will talk in terms of real estate nationally at times, but we will try to localize it a little bit. Obviously, I'm in the Washington, D.C. metro market, so it's a little bit different than the rest of the country. The metropolitan areas obviously are seeing a lot different types of sales going on, higher prices. It's pretty much pushing the average sales price up for the rest of the country just by the 4 or 5 major metropolitan areas. And we talk week in and week out about the Federal Reserve and interest rates and all these different things, but really we're just here to give you the information that you need to make educated decisions. Sometimes it's stuff that you may not want to hear, but somebody's got to put this type of information out there, and that's pretty much what the podcast is set up to do. If you get a chance, you can download and subscribe the podcast on iTunes. If you go to iTunes and search in there Real Estate 360, you can subscribe and download each and every one of the shows and all of our old shows. And if you don't have iTunes or access to that, you can also go to the website at realestate360live.com, and you can stream all the shows there as well. There's also an Ask a Question button on the right-hand side for any questions that you may have. That's typically where many listeners will write in things about problems that they're having with potentially getting a mortgage or buying a home or their credit, anything. There's nothing that's off limits. Like I always tell people, if there's something that I don't know, I'll find the answer for you. And it also helps because it allows us to kind of set up the show in the format geared to where people want to hear or interested in talking about. So joining me on our panel, as he does each and every week, is Louis Camerosano. Louis is a former school teacher, a former attorney, a former general manager of a major real estate portal. He's been cited in the media as a real estate industry expert in the Forbes, Fox Business, U.S. News, Wall Street Journal, MSN, CNN, MSNBC, and numerous others. Louis, how you doing today?
I'm doing grand, Ryan. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Great to have you back on, as always.
Thanks, Ryan.
So last week we talked, the rates had started to move up a little bit. It looked like we had a lot of positive momentum, when I say positive momentum, as far as these economic reports and as far as the media is concerned, they were positive. I wanted to start the show out because I think it's almost comical, because you and I had talked that they blame things on the weather for the first few months of this year, and that's why, really home sales were lacking, existing home sales were lacking, new home sales were lacking. And then when we're going to get to the spring market, everything should just pick up according to, Wall Street, traders, Congress, anybody that you talk to, the Fed, they were all on board with things were going to turn a corner. Well, today, actually, there's an article from the 23rd in the Inman News, and the headline reads, "Real estate spring buying season fails to launch." Citing that mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have lowered their forecast of home sales this year, citing low inventory and the affordability crunch that shortage of homes has spurred. Now, really interesting, coming from Freddie Mac's Vice President and Chief Economist, Frank, I can't remember his last name. Do you remember his, Nofast, I believe it is his last name? So he said that the spring home buying season has started with mixed signals. Tight inventory may pose a significant challenge for homebuyers in many markets across the country, which may result in higher home prices and sales being lower than expected. This is good news and this is all in his words, this is good news for those markets that have room to run on the house price appreciation front, but it's also going to increase the affordability pinch in many markets, especially along the country's east and west coast. Two indicators that are supporting local housing activity are rising consumer confidence and declining unemployment rates. Well, that's interesting that you can find, the positive way to spin this story, Frank. But the reality is that the inventory levels are now picking back up. And the affordability crunch that you refer to, well, I think that has more to do with that there are no jobs, and the jobs that are there are low-paying jobs. that people can't really afford to live on the money that they're even bringing in. Not to mention we have no wage growth. So the affordability is really based upon, the crunch is based upon the lack of jobs and the lack of wage growth. Sure, we've had rising home prices due to low inventory, but the inventory is starting to pick back up. And as you and I mentioned, Louis, the new home sales, it's not like builders seem to be kind of prepping for this because they're not increasing the new home builds that you would think they would if we were moving into a better market. What's your overall take on this article, just in general, as far as the spring season market for home sales, and where we go from here?
Okay, Ryan, they have been blaming the weather. They have been blaming lack of inventory for why the housing market wasn't taking off even more. Now they're starting to blame the weather and inventory for why the housing market has stalled. We nailed this months and months ago, saying that it wasn't inventory that was holding back the market. It was lack of demand based on what you just mentioned. The employment market and the general economy isn't that strong, and lending is tight, so people cannot afford houses. And that dynamic gets exacerbated as fewer people buy homes, but there's enough people to buy them to drive the price up, which makes them unaffordable. So this whole housing market is a disaster that they created intentionally to push home prices up, not realizing the unintended consequences is when you push home prices up, you force more and more people out of the housing market, which is a bad thing. It may help the people that are underwater that they put there in the first place because of their low interest rate policy, but it's really devastating for first-time home buyers and the real estate market and real estate professionals, because rising home prices may help a real estate agent who actually can sell a house at a higher price. They'll get a higher commission, but it means less work for everyone because fewer houses are being sold. So they have created a situation of low supply, low demand, and higher prices. That's not a good dynamic. And the only way that's going to improve is if prices come way down and the economy picks up and more people can afford houses and more people can get mortgages. But right now, no one can get mortgages, and even the people that have jobs, as you mentioned, lending is tight. So what I foresee happening, Ryan, is interest rates will start to tick up, and then what you've predicted will kick in. The banks will realize, hey, I can make money now that interest rates are higher, so I'll start lending all this money out that the Fed gave us at higher interest rates. And if people can't afford it, well, they'll come up with ways to loosen the lending standards, and they'll start doing all types of creative products, adjustable rate mortgages, and so on. And then maybe they'll try to push people into housing further. But if that has the impact of keeping home prices high, that's not going to last very long either.
Right.
Really, we need home prices to come down, interest rates to go up, and there to be a market where instead of 4 million homes being sold a year, we're back to something like 7 or 8 million, not necessarily the 12 million that we were selling a year 7, 8 years ago. And also new home construction, as you mentioned, Ryan, is at really historic lows. We're selling the same number of houses we sold in the 60s and 70s, 400,000 a year. That's nothing. They were selling 1.2, 1.5 million 7, 8 years ago. So this is not a recovery. And it's all been generated this way, as you mentioned. If there really was an inventory shortage, home builders would be meeting the test. Now, I did see something in CNBC because they finally realized, hey, wait a minute, there really isn't a lot of, there's an inventory shortage. How come these home builders aren't building? Now they're blaming there's not enough land.
Of course.
There's a land shortage, or there's a labor shortage. They're not going to mention that the home builders don't see the demand, so they're not building. Builders can always find places to build. Yeah, maybe they can't build in San Francisco, but clearly there's enough land in the country that isn't subject to regulation. And the problem with home builders, Ryan, is they've jacked the average home price for a new home is significantly higher than the average price of an existing home.
Right.
So that's going to put it's nice to have a new home, but the deals are in the existing homes, either in REO or foreclosure, or just because they're REO and foreclosures, the comps are lower than for new homes.
Yeah.
So, Brian, I have to ask you, where does this go?
I'm
more stagnation?
I would say more of the same. Yeah, I would assume, obviously we know, and it's interesting because for Fannie Mae, we talked about the Freddie Mac vice president come out, and then we had Fannie Mae's president chief economist Doug Duncan came out and said that the recent loss of momentum in the housing market is likely to be temporary. Well, that sounds like more of just a comment to just get us down the road a little bit further and to be able to reevaluate. He further went in to say that he expected housing starts to rise about 1.05 million units in 2014, up from 925,000 in 2013, but approximately 50,000 fewer than we expected at the beginning of the year due to builders' credit and labor constraints. So, yeah, all this industry spin, so to speak here, that we have, everybody's basically saying that, it's okay, for one reason or another, this temporary stall is not likely to continue because the labor market seems to be picking back up. It's all wishful thinking.
Let's talk about the labor market, Ryan. We didn't mention in the intro the initial jobless claims were a lot higher than they had expected. And I have the Reuters quote here basically saying, let's pull it up, let me get to the Reuters quote. What do you think Reuters says? Oh, but the rise in initial jobless claims, this isn't the first sentence. Here's how they editorialize. Probably does not suggest a shift in labor market conditions as the underlying trend continues to point to strength.
Right. Yeah. When we point
they don't have it in the first place, and then when it gets worse, they try to brush it off.
Right.
And we mentioned week after week, initial jobless claims have gone down, but non-farm payrolls haven't gone up. So it's a meaningless indicator that fewer people have lost their jobs in the last week because fewer people gained jobs over the last 5 years to lose them. So initial jobless claims, of course, aren't as high as they were when companies are laying off people left and right, 28,000 at a clip.
Yep.
They're just not hiring them back, and they're insisting there's a labor improvement, there's an economic recovery, there's a housing recovery. The funny thing about the housing recovery is there's nothing there they can even hang their hat on anymore because the housing recovery was solely in price. Mortgage applications are down again last week. New home construction is down. Existing home sales are down. The only thing they can point to is at least home prices are rising. Well, that's going to stop, and it has kind of stopped. So then where's the housing recovery if there's no sales in housing because people can't afford them? And if there really was a recovery, then they could afford them because they'd have jobs and the wages would increase so they can afford the houses. This is a disaster. I don't see how they're going to taper into this and pull out. This is not how you get escape velocity when everything's going down.
And you bring up a good point. The jobless claims were at 329,000 versus the estimate of 310,000. That was the exact number. So me and I mentioned week in and week out, regardless, these numbers are still way too high, right? They're not, and they're not taking into account all the people that are off, have been on unemployment for such an extended period of time, or really these part-time workers or low-income jobs that many of these people have that really they can't afford to do anything, right? The reality is that the majority of people, they're just not going to meet the minimum credit and underwriting guidelines that the lenders are going to set forth to even be able to be considered to purchase a home.
Unless you're buying one of those very expensive homes. And here's another spin, Ryan. When the low mortgage activity numbers came out and continue to come out, showing year over year, not only are home sales down 15, 20% year over year, month over month, but mortgage applications are down at record lows. But here's a headline from CNBC. Mortgage activity drops, but average loan size is at a record. That highlights this entire economy that, sure, most expensive homes are getting sold, people with the most money are getting mortgages or using cash to buy them, and everyone else is not buying houses and can't get mortgages and don't have jobs.
Yep.
But they spin this as, well, but wait a minute, the average loan size is at a record, as if that's a good thing. That just means that the top selling homes are the most expensive ones. And there's no trouble getting those approved, or people just pay cash for them. That's not a recovery.
No, it's not at all. I mean, and reality is I'm hearing a lot of talk now about, about this whole affordability thing. And there was no talk of affordability when the weather was here, right? It was only that it was the weather that was holding things back. But now that Fannie and Freddie are coming out and they're saying, look, I mean, overall production is down 55% year over year from last year, and interest rates really haven't changed all that much. Okay,
right.
so
well, they used to blame interest rates.
Correct, but that's on the most basic.
They'll never blame the economy.
No, and they don't want to scare off the potential people. So you have Fannie and Freddie coming out saying that this is temporary. Then you have National Association of Realtors saying it's the best time to buy in the history of man. So they're trying to remain, keep this positive light on everything, which is interesting because you and I will still agree that it is probably one of the best times to buy because of the low interest rate environment.
If you can get the mortgage and you have a job.
Right. So, but for the reality for many millions and millions and millions of people is that they don't have the job stability. They don't even have the income that's necessary to support buying a home. So the reality is they won't. So who has the money to buy these homes is the rich, is the people that are cash buyers, which we talked about week in and week out. That's really, who's been pushing the market all along. And they're benefiting from a low interest rate environment that's been sustained here, which is why I actually find that it's very comical for them to even mention that, for tight credit for builders, and that's the reason why they're not building more. If we had a great market, they'd be selling those new homes
absolutely
as fast as possible, and they'd be throwing up new ones because typically they can roll those loans from one house to the next in these subdivisions. So, in all the data, it doesn't line up for the way that they love to spin this story.
But the spin is working, Ryan. Gallup poll, April 24th, optimism for rising U.S. home values as highest since 2007. Yeah, highest since just before the last crash.
Right.
It's 56% of people think homes in their area will increase. Now, of course, these are homeowners, and homeowners are going to always want their home to go up. And if they're hearing in the media things are going well, they're not in the market. We used to do this survey at HomeGain. We used to ask the same question, do you think home prices will rise over the next 6 months to a year? And we asked homeowners and real estate agents, and the homeowners' predictive ability were terrible. And that makes sense because they're not in the market. They're just sitting around in their house hearing what they hear, whereas the real estate agents were pretty much spot on because they would see the inventory, they would see the demand, and they were pretty, they weren't always just saying they would go up because they wanted them to go up. They were pretty much spot on in predicting when they would go up or down during 2009, 10, 11, and 12. But right now, when you have homeowners saying that it's at a high back to 2007, that home prices are going to rise, you can take that with a grain of salt because that, at this point, is just the incessant chant that there's a recovery, everything's getting better, home prices have gone up, and therefore they think, okay, well, they'll continue to go up. But I don't think that home prices are going to continue to go up, and we'll see once again that the homeowners are a very poor leading indicator of their opinions on where home prices are headed. And, Ryan, remember back in June or July, we talked about the dark side of rising home prices. Before anyone even mentioned this, we had a small little blog post where one of the points mentioned was the dark side of rising home prices, besides number one was raises home affordability.
Yep.
And the second one was creates wealth disparity, causes property taxes to rise, prevents mobility, and is bad for the real estate industry. So just for our listeners, all these excuses that they come up with, 6 to 8 to 12 months later, we've discussed on the Real Estate 360 Live program months or sometimes even a year or two in advance.
Right. And the reality is that the media will fight off all the realities, right? They'll fight off what's going on as long as possible. But now they're having to try to bring it out subtly now because they know that this is going to, when we get further along into this year.
Once it becomes apparent, then they have to start going back to the real reasons, and then they mention the real reasons, and then they say they're temporary.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is, and they want to keep this positive consumer sentiment going, right? They want to make it, stock markets still moving up or still staying in the high range.
But the economy's based on, Ryan. That's it, right? Stock prices and real estate prices. That's all the economy is. If that goes away, it's over. There's no more economy.
And you brought up a good point when you did surveys at HomeGain, and the homeowners were always, wrong or on the wrong side because they're looking at the indicators of what the media is feeding them, right?
Right.
Like
they're not buying and selling. They're not on the market like you are. You're a real estate professional.
Correct.
You can see where it's headed.
Yeah, you can see where it's headed. I can already see into this spring market, even homes that are being renovated are sitting on the market a little bit longer than they normally would. And the only way that we can continue to keep pace with rising home prices at this point is for there to be creative loan programs to come out. That's the only way. because you would actually have to create a low down payment program that doesn't have high mortgage insurance premiums, such as FHA. I've already heard the rumblings of, FHA's mortgage insurance premiums are too high. I mean, you're talking 1.25, 1.35% monthly mortgage insurance. So if you got an interest rate of 4%, you might as well have, realistically, with the mortgage insurance, your interest rate's really into almost the mid-fives.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you're not actually benefiting from the low down payment type of program that FHA has provided for years. It used to be back at like 0.5%, right? 0.5% monthly. But now it's almost triple that. So it's no longer affordable. But if they created another program where the mortgage insurance was low or really non-existent and interest rates were actually at the market rates where they are right now, that would probably allow for a continued push upward in prices. Now, to a point, obviously, that's going to stop.
But isn't that, Ryan, isn't that when you do that, artificially creating demand from people who otherwise could not afford the home?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
You're just compounding the era of intervention in the market.
But do you know the way they'll spin that, though? They'll spin that they're trying to help low-income borrowers.
Oh, right? Yes. And low income will be defined as anyone who's making less than $500,000 a year.
I was about to say, you're a family, you can make at least $150,000 and still qualify for that program. And so realistically, I mean, these programs are going to pop up, Louis. They have to. I'm convinced.
Oh, they're not going to let the housing market just go away.
No.
If they do nothing, this market just dies because of the lack of volume and the lack of inventory. It can't go any higher. If investors have pulled out, they're not going to sustain the prices. They're not going to put money in. If your regular people can't get mortgages and buy houses, even at these high prices, prices have to come down for any volume to start increasing. And they don't want the prices to come down because if prices come down, you still have so many people, 25, 40%, depending on how you calculate it, that are underwater. Politically, that's a disaster if the housing recovery in price starts to fall back and people all of a sudden, more people are underwater and no homes are being sold. That's a disaster, and they won't let that happen. It should happen. It should have happened in 2008, but they've managed to pump it back up, and it's not sustainable. It wasn't sustainable when it collapsed in the first time. I'm surprised they managed to boost it up the way they have.
Yeah, and I'm actually seeing a huge increase in short sales and foreclosures right now, Louis, which the media is not going to pick that up either. And the reason for that is a lot of these have actually been pushed out for, the homeowners had been working with their bank to try to get modifications. That process takes forever, by the way. To go through modifications, to potentially get into a forbearance agreement, to any of these, like temporary Band-Aids that the banks will work with you for just a little bit. And the only reason they're doing that now, the only reason they're going to be more willing to work with you now is because they don't want the bad publicity, right? At least they say, hey, we gave you forbearance, we looked at your loan modification, we couldn't do anything there. So unfortunately, we're going to have to take the house back. But if they go through the process, they can do that. All in the meantime, they know that, hey, well, if we have some rising prices, it's not the worst thing in the world to take the house back. We're going to get some more equity out of it. And that's what the banks have been doing. They've been holding on to this inventory. But now I'm starting to see that there's a lot more inventory of foreclosures creeping back to the market. And they're not coming, by the way, a lot of the time of MLS. If you go to websites such as auction.com, if you go to a website such as pubzoo.com, look on there. They're live auctions. Now, some are listed on MLS and some aren't, but you'll see a lot of them on there that specifically say cash only, no financing available. So these websites are popping up all over the place. Online auctions are becoming very and that's actually a way to not have to flood MLS with all the foreclosures, right, Louis?
Right.
So you don't actually have to push them out there. You push them out there to the investors that are the ones that are.
So it's under the radar in terms of both just the average Joe can't get at them, but also it's under the radar in terms of what the media looks at for its statistics because they don't see them on the MLS, so they assume that these homes aren't hitting the market.
Correct.
And they also don't hit the market probably in terms of the comps that are created.
Yeah, most of the time they're not. They're not, I mean, like I said, some are. Some of the ones that are put on the auction sites are also listed on the MLS site, but not all of them.
What percentage do you think that you see on these sites are not also dual listed?
Probably 50% of them.
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, they're popping up all over the place. I mean, you can literally go on these sites, go on auction.com or Hubzu.com and search your city across, or any city across the country, and you'll see they're there. Now, some of those.
Are there a lot of? I mean, when you say they're there, how many in each in a major metro might you see?
At any given time, I could see 15 to 20 just in my surrounding area.
Right.
You know what I mean? And they're coming on. Yeah, they're coming on daily though. You know what I mean? Like this is something that's just it's been happening, and it's been happening.
And they're being sold quickly too, probably.
Yes, and the auction process, like the online auction process, is a little bit different because they set a reserve, and then believe it or not, the house that I live in today, I bought on an auction site. And so what they'll do is they'll set a minimum reserve, just like standard auction probably would do, and then you bid on it. And then if you don't meet the reserve, they still reserve the right to negotiate a contract with you if you're the highest bidder, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of them are, they're setting realistic reserves, and the ones that don't sit on there, right? They don't ever move. But the ones that have realistic reserve prices, they end up getting bid up over the bid price most of the time, and that you got to close in X amount of days. Some of them give you the option where you can get lender financing, and some say that it has to be an all cash transaction. Now, granted, if it's an all cash transaction, you're going to get a better price. But when I'm seeing these type of indicators, when I'm seeing that there's a lot more short sales and foreclosures, it's telling me that, look, the job situation is much worse than anybody wants to lead on, and that the jobs that are out there are people that are working maybe 1, 2, 3 part-time jobs just to make it work, right?
Wall Street doesn't see this, though, Ryan, because if you look at the stock price of Zillow, it's as if the housing market is roaring. And if you think about Zillow, it's a combination of both bubbles because you have real estate and the stock market, and that's exactly what they want, is both stocks and real estate to rise. And, you're getting the valuations on Wall Street that are beyond, not affordability, because you can always afford a stock, that are beyond rationale and all based on wishful thinking about what the company might do in the future, but nowhere near based on any set of profitable numbers that they might have. So if you look at Zillow, if you were thinking rationally, you'd say, well, wait a minute, if not that many homes are being sold, that means real estate agents aren't doing that much business, which means they can't be spending that much money on marketing. If it's 3 times less than, the housing sales are 3 times less than they were 5-8 years ago, why would the stock price be roaring at this point? And again, it's all part and parcel of this economy they've created where they're pushing money into bolstering assets that are in stock and real estate. And Zillow is a perfect example of a recipient of that craze that they've created where they're basically saying we need real estate to go higher, we need stocks to go higher. Here's the perfect stock, Zillow, because it's real estate and Wall Street company.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and
there's no logic behind it, Ryan. What do you think of that? I mean, there's no normal valuation.
There's no normal valuation. It's all built. It's on hype, right? Everything is on hype. And really, the funny thing is that if anybody actually was to read into the hype that they're putting out there, they would see that it's a sham. There's really nothing there. It's just like Facebook. I mean, their value is in having users and then selling, advertising, but they bring no true value. It's the same with Zillow. And the funny thing is that the clients that I get that come from Zillow are really, they think that they're educated because they go to that site, but they're really not educated at all because the information a lot of the time on there is, other than some of the question and answer sections that you can get where there's actually professionals in there giving some decent advice, but the articles and everything else, the estimates, and I mean, it's crap. It really is. It is. I mean, you can't. I've seen disparity in valuations. I understand the whole premise. You can show the home sales in areas and stuff, but I've seen disparity in home prices of $100,000 to $150,000 from those estimates. I mean, it's a good tool if you want to see what the neighborhood maybe looks like from an aerial view, if you want to see what surrounding houses have sold for. But a lot of times they're not updated for a couple months. And
but if you're outside of the industry, Ryan, you don't know any of this. If you're outside the industry, you think that Zillow has 70 million unique visitors and they're taking over the world. But if you stop to think, 70 million visitors a month, that means a third of the U.S. population visits that site when only how many homes are being sold annually?
Yeah.
They're not there to buy or sell a house then if they are there.
No.
Because that would indicate that the housing market was roaring. 70 million people visiting just Zillow alone. Add in all the other sites that claim they have these tens of millions of visitors. There's no way that hundreds of millions of people are on real estate sites like Zillow and all the rest of them looking for houses.
No.
And if they are, it's a waste of time because they're not buying them.
Right. And
so there's got to be other reasons why they're on the site, or you got to question those numbers.
Yeah, half the people, if they're going to Zillow, they're not necessarily going there to say, hey, we want to sell their home. They might be saying, hey, I wonder what the value of my home is. They're trying to look and see if they're not upside down anymore. They're trying to see if they can potentially refinance. But most of the time, it's not so that they can go buy another home. You know what I mean? It's an investigative tool that you can use. But for the most part, it's a useful
site, but you have to question how much money can they make providing a free service that you say isn't even that good.
No, it's not. I mean, like I tell, once I have an initial meeting with one of my clients, I'll tell them, please, from this point forward, do not go to any of the other sites. Don't go to any of them. Don't, because it's not the most accurate, up-to-date information. I give them the direct link to the public version of my MLS.
Well, that's definitely more up-to-date.
Yeah, and then I set them up on an auto search, which comes directly from my MLS. It's going to send them every single listing that fits their criteria within seconds of it hitting the market, right? And I only want them to pay attention to that because guess what happens? When they come back to me, they've been on Zillow, they've been on Trulia, they've been on Weikert's site, they've been on all these other different sites, and they leave listings up or they're just not updated until it could be a couple days.
Well, here's what else happens, Ryan. I like what you're doing because when we look for a house, sometimes we sign up to see a home with an agent who's advertising on Zillow, and we never hear from them. Now, if I had registered on my local realtor site who presents the MLS or on your site, you'd get back to me.
Yep.
Now, Zillow can't control that, but it highlights the fact that as a consumer, you go there and the agents may not respond to you. Now, what happened on a couple occasions was Zillow would write back to us and say, hey, did you hear from the agent? Which I think they should do. And I'd write back and I'd say, no. And that's the last I hear from them. So they basically, I guess they gather the information, they ping the agent, but there's not much else they can do about him. Now, that's not good business because if I sign up on your site, you're then going to send me listings. And if I have a question and I say I want to go look at this house, I'm not going to get dead air. You're going to respond to me.
Yep.
And so that's, more people are using the large portals where there's less response than using the local real estate agent who has access, like you do, to the MLS, which is the most up-to-date set of listings. And you're going to get the most responsive person on the other end.
Yeah, and not to mention the fact that a lot of the time when people go on those sites, I always tell people don't make the mistake of thinking that just because an agent advertises on a site like Zillow that they know what they're doing, right?
Well, anyone can buy advertising.
Yeah, exactly. And advertising does not equal that you're going to sell your house and you're going to sell your house for top value, or you're going to be able to work with an agent that's going to help you be able to find a home in your home in your price range and be able to negotiate a contract that has the best potential to get accepted by the seller. I mean, I see this day in and day out. It's just, and especially like I said, if they're already on the Zillow site to begin with, to me the expectation levels is somewhat different versus me getting that client or somebody coming through my website because they've already been watching daily videos on homes that have been coming on the market in my cities, and they know what
your daily videos.
My daily videos where I'm talking about, what's coming on the market every day. I'm talking about whether I feel the price is fair or not. So they're going to hear it. Now, granted, it's still my opinion. It's my professional opinion. But I feel like, when you go on Zillow, they're giving you estimates and all these other things, and then there's a button on the side to connect with an agent, and then you connect with that agent. And then, so they don't know what you've been looking at. They don't really know. They just know that you clicked the button and that you wanted to potentially talk to them. Where versus when
and Zillow doesn't care. They're concerned that you click that button so they can tell the agent, hey, we sent you a lead. And if the agent says, well, the lead was no good, they don't care. Because, if you notice, Zillow does not produce its churn rate in its SEC reports. So you'd have to think that if it was good, they would show it. You'd have to suspect that if they don't show it, maybe it's not that good because the agents don't see the value, perhaps because the consumers don't see the value. Because when I used it, if I don't get a response, no response is the worst thing you can possibly do when you waste your time looking at homes. You say, I want to see that one. You contact a couple of them, and none of them contact you back.
Yep.
Zillow gets credit for the lead that was sent. The agent pays for it. So the only person who made out on that deal was Zillow.
Absolutely.
They got paid. The agent got nothing. I got nothing. And the share price goes up because they can say they sold more leads this month.
All good things come to an end, and I feel like that's another one of them. I mean, at some point, we often talk, Louis, like everybody's always like, okay, well, so the housing market, now we have Fannie and Freddie coming out saying that this is just a temporary lull. And lo and behold, what else do we have going on geopolitically right now? We've got Russia and Ukraine. Again, they were supposed to have figured something out. Now Russia is hiking the rates for the second time as their credit rating was cut by the S&P. They lowered it from a triple B to a triple B minus.
Do you think that was a retaliation? Who controls the S&P?
Exactly. Of course it was. So, and when you read further into the central bank of Russia, and they're blaming, the situation and the lack of production and investment in Russia is due to the uncertainty about the international political situation. So now we've shifted all the limelight back off of us once again because we can do that. And it's back on them. And it's also not just back on Russia. We now have the ECB that's stepping in. President Draghi's now coming out and saying that, look, we have a potential deflationary threats that are out there. We're considering doing asset-based purchase.
I.e. European QE.
Yeah. I mean,
hey, you know what they might buy, Ryan? Just to time it perfectly with the U.S. cutting back on its QE, they might buy U.S. Treasuries.
It wouldn't surprise me. But once again, who looks like the hero here again? Because we're tapering, right? We're tapering now, so it looks like we have our financial
right. Make the dollar stronger. Actually, it's not happening. The dollar's continuing to go down even though they're tapering.
Right. So, but it gives the appearance, and the media will be able to spend this, that it looks like the United States has all their ducks in a row now. It looks like
we got our inflationary pressures, or deflationary pressures under control. We actually got some good inflation, and it's those Europeans that are fighting deflation. And look at Russia; it's a mess.
Yeah, absolutely. So Russia and the ECB. I mean, we've got all these things going on. So guess what?
But we got Facebook, we got Zillow. we're doing the right things.
We've got high stock prices. We've got a low interest rate environment, right?
And home prices are rising. And if it wasn't for the weather and the low inventory, this would be nirvana.
And don't forget the 4 million renters that are ready to buy tomorrow.
Oh, they're ready. And what about all those millennials just ready to go and buy a home? They're just making a lifestyle choice right now. But they'll grow out of it.
Yeah, you got that right. And, the question that many people have been asking, too, Wall Street and stock traders, everybody keeps saying, well, typically when the economy starts to improve, mortgage interest rates rise, right? So that hasn't been happening. So the question is now, how come the mortgage interest rates have not, started to rise by the amount that traders and economists had expected? Well, think about it. We've got the Russia-Ukraine situation. So anytime there's geopolitical events going on, there's uncertainty in the markets. Where does money flow? It flows back into the safe haven of bonds and mortgage-backed securities. So that's what's taking place.
The false safe haven. I mean,
exactly. We also have uncertainty about the future of the stock market when this stuff is going on. So we have the employment picture, which is terrible.
No, it's not. No.
Well,
it's weather-related. And fewer people lost their jobs, Ryan. So that means that signals strength in the job market.
Maybe I should have changed that. U.S. employment picture is not good, but the headlines make it look good, improving, and positive.
Improving, right. In fact, Yellen said, Miss Yellen, not chairwoman or chairman, of the Federal Reserve said in her speech on April 16th that in 2 years, this whole economy will be perfect. We'll have reached full employment, and we'll have that coveted inflation.
Yep.
She knows that.
Yeah.
And people listen to this and say, oh, okay, so I guess we just put our heads down and wait for that to happen because we're in a recovery and it's happening, and in 2 years, work is done.
Absolutely.
$4 trillion printed later. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and there's all these things going on now, which now takes, like I said, that takes the limelight off of us, the United States. So this week, guess what? This week, Louis, we don't have to worry about employment. We don't have to really, consumer sentiment comes out today. We really don't have to worry about that today because we can focus more on Russia and the ECB, right? So next week maybe we can worry about something with the United States. But that's only until we find something else that's going worse for another country.
Next week, what isn't there an FOMC meeting, Federal Open Market Committee meeting, and another rate decision announcement, as well as their view on tapering or not tapering?
I believe so.
And what are your predictions, Mr. Sloper?
My prediction is that they would probably continue to taper because while all this, negativity is taking place overseas, it would show signs of strength in many people's opinion to continue to taper to show that, hey, look, we're moving in the right direction. Now, at this point, I don't know what the Fed chair, as you said, is saying behind closed doors because she has to see. And when you have all this other information lining up, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac coming out saying that things are stagnant.
She's got an itchy finger. She wants to print money.
She wants to, yeah. And realistically, I don't know how long that she can continue to taper before, that itchy finger hits the button, right?
I mean, she is on record as being for negative interest rates. She was all for QE. And as we've said, the only reason they're tapering now is either because our foreign creditors, some good it did us because they're not buying anyway, but they still hold Treasuries. They probably don't want to prevent them from dumping. Our foreign creditors probably told us, knock off the QE, or we're not interested in buying these Treasuries anymore. Or they're doing it to gain credibility to ratchet it back up again because they don't want to be seen as doing QE infinity, even though they're on like the fourth or fifth iteration of this. So tapering's easy. They've done it a few times. They can do it again. And at some point, Ryan, you're right, they'll just turn around and find an excuse with the new credibility that they've had because they've tapered, or maybe even shut the program down. And when they see everything collapse and not go the way they want, well, they'll have to take extraordinary measures, just like they did to solve the financial crisis in 2008. And they'll come up with a way to print more money, whether it's QE or whatever they come up with. But Yellen loves, how else do you create negative interest rates? You can't set them. She knows that. There's no such thing as setting a negative interest rate. You got to print money.
Yeah, well,
dollars.
All the stars are aligning for her to potentially be able to do this sometime.
She's got to fix the labor market. She's on record as saying that.
So she knows she has to fix the labor market. She wants to fix the labor market. We know that she's all for negative interest rates. Then we hear that the ECB is potentially going to do asset-based purchases, right? So look, it's not just us; they need it too. And then we have
Japan
Russia,
too.
Right. It's not going to be only us. So it's not going to be international, figures pointing the finger at us, telling us, "Hey, you have to stop doing that." Right?
We're all doing it.
Right. If we're all doing it, then it has to be okay.
That's like the child, the schoolyard excuse. Why something went wrong when the teacher comes out and he says, Johnny did it. Johnny says, well, Joe did it. And Joe said, well, Mary did it. And they all say, well, we were all doing it.
Yep.
That doesn't make it right.
It definitely doesn't make it right, but that, we've been following this for some time now, Louis, and if there's one thing that remains constant, it's that we've been pretty good at predicting the moves. I mean, maybe not the exact time of it. You predicted the last time when they started the taper from the beginning, but once you figure out kind of what their objectives are, you can pretty much, they kind of lead you down the path, right?
Well, they can only do one thing, Ryan. They can officiously intermeddle in the economy. They'll never step back and wait and see what might happen. They want to control the economy, command and control. And really, their club that they have, it's just like the guy with the hammer, sees everything as a nail, is they have a printing press. They set rates. They set the price of money, which is the biggest manipulation on earth that you can do, is set the price of what people pay for money. And then they print money. And it hurts them probably when they print less of it, because now they're not intermeddling as much as they wish they could.
So the only thing that the Fed hasn't tried that we had talked about, so they've obviously kept mortgage interest rates low for an extended period of time, and what has that done? Absolutely nothing, really, other than help the rich get richer. But we did bring up the one thing that they could possibly do if they started to print more money and started to push and set preconditions on that money with the banks, that they had to lend that money out to small business. Do you think that that's something that could be on the table? Because, you see, that's the only thing that I feel like that if they got creative to potentially have some sort of small impact.
Well, you got to remember, the Fed is not self-propelling in its initiatives. It takes its orders from the too-big-to-fail banks. I mean, J.P. Morgan is on the board, Jamie Dimon, of the New York Federal Reserve, which is the most popular. So if Jamie Dimon is saying that interest rates are going to double in the next few years, and that's not a problem, he must already know what's going to happen, because he probably has figured out when rates double, he can make money now once again, lending out money. So he would not be opposed to telling the Fed to tell him back that he's got to lend out all those reserves, but the precondition is we got to get interest rates higher before I start lending that money out. Right. And then they'd be seen as the savior. Look, the banks have been sitting on this money, and Yellen comes in and says, we got to create jobs, so we're going to make the banks lend money, and they're going to have to lend it to certain types of businesses that are going to create jobs, and then she'll look like a hero. The banks will make even more money from having those reserves lent out at much higher rates, which is basically a kick in the head to people who for 6 years are shut out of the low interest rates, will not have to pay more, but they should be happy because at least now they can get loans, and it's a sign that the economy is improving because rates are higher. So they can spin this any number of ways. They try to control the economy, and basically, even if they don't control the economy, their number one objective is to get a result so that the banks control their destiny, which means they always make money no matter what happens.
We know that that's the one thing that's going to remain true, right? They're always going to make money. And, it's like you said, if Jamie Dimon is saying, hey, interest rates are going to be double, well, guess what? Now if all of a sudden a small business is going to be borrowing money at 8%, right?
Well, then he'll lend it. Look, if they fired all those people, all the banks fired an enormous number of people in the mortgage groups because they weren't making any money lending out at 3% and 4%.
Yep.
Now they can be seen as saviors. They're job creating now because, they're lending out money once again. Yeah, at much higher rates. If that's what Yellen decides to do because they tell her that's what she needs to do.
We've had a huge, money grab here for some years now, right, where these low interest rate environments have obviously helped the rich get much richer, and, it's actually suppressing the middle class. I mean, the middle class is evaporating pretty much beneath, right in front of our eyes. And mainly due to, the Federal Reserve and Congress not letting the economy fall on its face back when it probably should have.
Right, because the millennials would have been the ones to pick it up. The younger generation would have seen the opportunity. You'd have places. If you think about social changes and economic changes that have happened over the last 50, 70 years, they've been because of young people. World War II, young people come back from the war. They reestablished the economy. In the 60s and 70s and 80s, you had gentrification of poor areas where you had yuppies in the 80s where they went into bad areas and made them better.
Right.
Well, right now, young people aren't going anywhere and making anything any better because they're staying at home.
Yep.
Because they don't have the economic opportunities that prior generations had because the Fed has created a circumstance where they've entrenched the older losers, economic losers. So they can't go and pick up the pieces because they can't go and get loans and renovate some bad areas. You would think about it, maybe 30 years ago, if Detroit was in the situation it's in now, it would become an artist or a high-tech community because they can go in there and buy those houses for cheap and set up their businesses. But they don't have the wherewithal or the ability to go and do that.
No.
And if they can get assistance in terms of food stamps or if they owe too much money on student loans, they can't go and do that.
Yeah, nobody's in a financial position to really do much of anything.
Other than investors.
Right.
Really, but that's different than creating a dynamic community based on generations, working in large numbers versus a handful of investors. Big difference.
And this is all a byproduct of an artificially manipulated market, right?
So wasn't there naturally people would flow towards those opportunities like Detroit.
Yep. And these artificially, manipulated markets and interest rates that we have, one would think that, everything would be thriving and people would come up with new business ideas and things would flourish, and that's not what's taking place.
Well, what's taking place, Ryan, the companies that do the best, as we mentioned last week, are the ones that lose the most money because Wall Street rewards them. I mean, right. Zillow or Facebook or Netflix or all these companies that have these sky-high valuations, Tesla, they don't make any money.
Yeah.
And that's what Wall Street goes for. So if you're an entrepreneur, you don't want a business where you're going to say, well, I'll get a solid 20% operating margin income. No. You want to show how many eyeballs you can get, how many pie-in-the-sky, innovative, disruptive things that you might be able to do. That's what Wall Street's paying you for, speculative investment.
Yeah, I read somewhere that, like, Twitter, they had moved their big corporate office in right down New York City, and it's just like, they're getting rewarded for doing not much of anything, but yet they're going to continue to buy whatever they want and look like this big glamorous company. If they actually really cared, why would you buy a huge, office in New York City? You'd go somewhere else.
That's where capital is going. The public markets are putting money into these companies, and they're spending it, and as they spend it, they're rewarded for making acquisitions that cost them $30, $40 million or $1 billion for companies that don't make any money either. So they're piling more lead onto their own Titanics, and they're getting rewarded for being able to sink faster. Because the markets are telling the market, and the market's believing them, that by doing this, we're going to lose even more money, but we're going to make even more money one day in the future. At some point, people are going to say, when?
The question is when is that day going to come?
And once you remember and this is fascinating to me, Ryan, because in 2000, you had 4 years of internet mania where these companies were insisting they were going to make money, and then one day people woke up and said, no, you're not. and companies that were selling for $300 or $400 went down to $2.
Right.
Finally, people throw the towel in once they realize that they've been told a story that they no longer believe.
Right. There is no real value in this company.
Well, there's value, but it's at $2, not at $300.
Right. And it's going to be a painful ride down for many people that have their retirement accounts and everything else tied up in these companies. And Buffett made this point because he didn't buy them during the internet craze, and he's not buying them now. But for most fund managers, if you don't buy them and you buy what you think are sound dividend-producing stock investments, you got your clock clean the last 3 years. You needed to be in LinkedIn. You needed to be in Zillow. You needed to be in Tesla. You needed to be in all of these companies that don't make any money. Yep.
Otherwise, your returns were subpar or negative.
Yep.
The highest performing companies are the ones that make no money.
It's a sad fact. It's a sad fact. But we'll have to keep our eye on things, and things I have a feeling are going to start to change here really soon, Lewis.
Not sustainable.
It's not. It really isn't. And now that they're starting to come out and talk that it's no longer the weather and now it's something else. They're going to run out of excuses because it's just the inventory is going to mount here before soon.
Already has.
I haven't know, but it's going to mount to where they're not going to have an answer for why it's going to go over a 6 month plus month supply. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Why those homes aren't selling even with the supply being there. That's
correct.
This foolish argument that it's like if you build it, they will come. Somehow, if there were more houses, people would buy them. There being more houses doesn't make it easier for me to buy a house if I can't afford it.
Right.
Unless that inventory gets to a point where they have to start bringing the prices down. But that's not what they're counting on. They're thinking they can bring more inventory to the market and home price that would create more demand and home prices would go up. Yeah. The reverse. The more inventory that comes on the market, eventually home prices will go down.
Yeah, and that's what, I'm going to keep my eye on that. I'm going to watch days on market and things like that, but definitely something we should pay attention to for the coming shows. Coming up on the end of the show, Lewis, can you give our listeners your website so they can check out your blog that you do?
Oh, sure. Thanks. It's smallgold.com, SMAULGLD. If you go there, you can find analysis and also our shows on real estate, the economy, the Federal Reserve, gold and silver. If you go there, there's a blog post there every couple of days, so please visit smallgold.com. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate it. And, guys, if you remember to subscribe, download on iTunes, Real Estate 360 is what you search in the search button. And also, if you'd like to stream it, you can stream it on the website at realestate360live.com. That's realestate360live.com. Until next time.